Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and I've been reviewing a lot of mini PCs lately, and a lot of you have enjoyed watching those reviews, and I always try to get a different configuration with each one so we can kind of explore what's out there. And I got another one here from GMKtec, but what's different about this one is that it has the new Intel chipset, the Core Ultra 5, and this actually is a very nicely performing mini PC that I think many of you will find interesting. So we're going to take a look at this one and put it through all of our usual tests in just a second. But I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that GMKtec provided this to the channel free of charge. However, no additional compensation was received. They are not reviewing or approving this before it gets uploaded, and all the opinions you're about to hear are my own. So let's get into it now and see what this mini PC is all about. Now, the price point on this comes in at $670, but you do need to make sure that you click on the coupon code you will see on the Amazon page in my affiliate link. If you don't click on it, you will pay $130 more than you should. So make sure you click everything before you check out. Now, this is called the GMKtec NUCbox K9. It has an Intel Core Ultra 125H on board, and that chip is running in a 65-watt TDP configuration. This has 14 cores and 18 threads on board. Some of them are those efficiency cores, but it all adds up to good performance. As for memory, you've got 32 gigabytes of DDR5 5600 megahertz RAM. It's Crucial RAM, it's name brand, good stuff, and you can upgrade it. I think you can go to 64 gigabytes total if you want. You also have two NVMe SSD slots on board. There is a NVMe from Mason Semi in the machine when you get it. That's 1 terabyte of capacity, and then of course you can add another one or swap out the one it comes with if you want down the road. So very upgradable, and lots of good stuff inside. Now, as far as ports are concerned, you've got a bunch on here to talk about. Here you've got your audio output and input. This is a full-service USB 4.0 port. It runs at 40 gigabits per second. It is also full service, so it'll do video output. You can also power the computer via this port, but you're going to max out at around 100 watts, and it comes with a 120-watt power supply. So I would suggest using the power supply and not the USB-C, but you can power it that way if you want. And I also connected my Thunderbolt SSD that I like to test on these devices. It's this one from Samsung. This won't work on a regular USB-equipped computer, but if it has USB 4 or Thunderbolt, it will. And what I like about this drive is it gives me a sense as to whether or not it can pass the full 40 gigabits of bandwidth, and this port does. Many of the mini PCs we have looked at recently are running at 20 gigabits per second. This one looks like it's delivering the full 40. So this is a full-fledged Thunderbolt port for all intents and purposes, even though it is just meeting the USB 4 spec. Here you've got two USB 3 ports on the front, so you can plug in hard drives and stuff. On the back, you've got another two USB-A ports. You have a display port out and an HDMI out, so you can get 3 4K displays going simultaneously. And then you have two 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports back here. I tested both of them a little bit earlier. Both ran at the full bandwidth, so I was very pleased with the overall Ethernet performance here. Sometimes on these mini PCs, one port performs better than the other. This one was performing perfectly on both ports. The chipset, though, for the Ethernet is Realtek. I know that's a turnoff for some, but in Windows here, it works great. And here is your power input and a Kensington lock slot. All right, so here we are booted up with Windows 11. This does have a fully activated copy of Windows 11 Pro. Like many PCs that we look at, though, the onboarding process for Windows is a little flaky. It doesn't connect you to your Microsoft account. It uses a local account. You can, of course, connect to that Microsoft account later, but generally, more legit versions of Windows tend to take you through the Microsoft prescribed onboarding process, which this one does not. That said, I did scan it for malware and viruses, and it came up clean with a number of different virus and malware checking utilities. As you can see here, web performance is a no-brainer. It is super fast. Everything is very responsive here, as you would expect out of a machine with this many cores on board. So if you are doing basic work here, I think this is going to perform quite well. I also loaded up YouTube a little bit earlier, and we took a look at a 4K 60 frames per second video. Did get a few drop frames when it first started up, but once everything settled down, we had consistent performance here. So if you are looking to stream some video from a video service or from YouTube, it should be fine. Although I don't recommend these Windows PCs for home theater use because they do tend to be a bit flaky with some of the HDR modes that video enthusiasts would like to use on their televisions. Now, in all of my reviews, I always look at the Browserbench.org Speedometer benchmark test. That's a test that measures how well the computer performs doing web applications. And the people behind that benchmark recently came up with version 3 of that test, which I've been running now on all of the computers that I've gotten in over the last month or two. And I finally have enough that I can start using that benchmark in my videos here. So there we got a score on that 3.0 test of 20.9, and this is very much within the margin of error of a Dell XPS 14 that we'll be looking at soon that has an Ultra 7 155H processor. You can also see how it performs against the Ryzen 8845HS that was on the GMKtec K8 we looked at a few months ago. The bottom line here is that this machine performs where it should given the processor that is inside. Let's take a look at a few other things. Next up, we ran DaVinci Resolve with a 4K 60 frames per second video project. And what I like to do here is just drop in a transition to see how fast it can render in real time. And as expected here, it was able to handle that task effortlessly. So if you are looking to do some simple video editing, similar to the kinds of things that you see on this particular YouTube channel, you can do this without having to attach an external GPU. It should have enough horsepower here to keep up with that, and that is performing how we would expect out of a processor from this generation. So far so good for basic tasks and video editing. Let's take a look at some games now. All right, so we're going to start off here with No Man's Sky, one of my favorite games. This is running at 1080p at the standard settings, which is essentially the lowest settings for this particular title. And I'm currently getting just under 60 frames per second. It'll occasionally hit 60 here on the planet, but it's generally in the upper 50s. But as you can see here, the game performs pretty nicely. There are a couple of little lag hits here and there. This, I assume, is when it's loading in textures. It has to swap in and out of memory. But overall, this looks great and it plays great. So you can play games like this without issue. We also ran a more demanding game here. This is Red Dead Redemption 2. This is running at 1080p at the lowest settings. The compression that producer Jake was using on this recording was a little high, so the images might look a little fuzzier than they did in real time, but it was performing quite well at those settings. We were getting between 40 and 50 frames per second, even in some of the more complex environments here. So all good on that front and consistent with some of these other Core Ultra machines that we've looked at. Here is Grand Theft Auto 5 running at 1080p at high settings. And here, as you can see, we were north of 60 frames per second most of the time, occasionally dipping down a little bit, as you can see there. But by and large, this is a very nicely performing machine for games, especially without having to plug an external GPU into it. So once again, we're seeing how these Core Ultra chips are a major jump forward for Intel's integrated graphics. They've certainly come a long way over the last couple of years, and that is thanks to the competition that AMD has brought to the market with their chips. On the front, remember, we also have that USB 4 port, so you could plug an external GPU into this with a Thunderbolt GPU enclosure and get better graphics performance out of the box. But overall, I am pleased with what we saw here. And on the 3D Mark TimeSpy Benchmark test, we got a score of 3,309. Once again, this is right on par with what I would expect out of this particular processor. And you can see that this is actually performing competitively with a GTX 1650 Ti discrete GPU that we looked at just a couple of years ago on an HP computer. So all in, again, great graphics performance out of this. We also ran the 3D Mark stress test, and there we got a passing grade of 99.5%. You can also see the temperature the computer was running at the conclusion of that test. And what that says is there should be very little thermal throttling even under heavy sustained load. Now, the computer does have a lot of ventilation on here. You're going to want to keep the vents on the side and on the back clear. But the fan, even under load, is barely noticeable. It is not that loud, especially if you're playing a game with the speakers going. You won't hear that fan at all. And typically when it's sitting idle, it will be pretty quiet. You will probably hear the fan quite a bit when you first take ownership of this because it does have to install all of its updates, and that does run the processor a little bit more. But overall, pretty quiet fan, all things considered, because sometimes these little mini PCs can be quite noisy. All right, one last thing to take a look at, and that is its Linux performance. I booted up the most recent version of Ubuntu here, and most of the hardware was detected successfully and it performed quite well. What wasn't detected, though, was the audio. So we were not able to get sound to come out of this thing, but the Ethernet worked, the Wi-Fi worked, the video was detected properly. This is a 4K 60 image that you see right here. And as you can see, the performance was very snappy and responsive. So you can double up your OS on here. You could put Windows on one drive and install a second one and have Linux running on that. You will have to find some drivers for the audio, but otherwise it performed quite well no matter which operating system we threw at it. And overall, even though it is a little more expensive than the last GMKtec machine we looked at, I think for the price point, you're getting a lot of hardware here, a lot of RAM, a lot of storage, a nicely performing processor with great graphics output. And the only thing I would add here at the end is just to buy at your own risk, because this is an overseas company. If you need support, you're going to have to go overseas to China to get it. So there are some caveats here to be aware of. But performance-wise, for the price, I am very pleased with what they have in this offering here, and it's something I am comfortable recommending if you're willing to take a little bit of a risk on long-term support. That's going to do it for this one. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Brian Parker, Budley, Hot Sauce and Video Games, Steve Green, and Amda Brown. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.